Alexander the Great. In 334 BCE, on the shores of the Hellespont, a 22-year-old king stepped onto Asian soil and threw a spear into the ground. According to ancient chroniclers, he declared the continent already his by right of conquest. The king was Alexander of Macedon. At that moment, the Persian Empire stretched over nearly 2 million square miles, from Egypt to India. It possessed vast resources, seasoned generals, and armies that could field hundreds of thousands of men. Macedonia, by comparison, was a compact kingdom with limited manpower. What followed should not have happened. Within 3 years, Alexander had shattered the largest empire on earth. At the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Darius III assembled what was described as an overwhelming force. Ancient sources claim Persian numbers may have reached 100,000 or more, including cavalry, infantry, and scythe chariots. Alexander commanded perhaps 40,000 men. The battlefield had been deliberately flattened to favor Persian mobility. The odds were unmistakable. Yet the Macedonian formation did something extraordinary. Instead of charging directly, Alexander angled his line, stretching it to the right, forcing the Persian left flank to extend beyond its prepared position. As Darius shifted forces to compensate, a gap opened in the center. Alexander saw it instantly. He led the companion cavalry wedge personally, driving straight through the breach toward Darius himself. The psychological shock was immediate. When the Persian king turned his chariot and fled, the cohesion of the entire imperial army collapsed. The precision of this maneuver remains studied in military academies today. The oblique advance, the calculated risk, the deliberate creation of weakness in the enemy line, these were not improvised decisions. They were products of a mind that seemed to perceive the battlefield several moves ahead. Alexander's army marched over 20,000 miles during his campaigns. They crossed deserts where temperatures exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. They traversed mountain passes over 10,000 feet high. Siege engines were constructed on site to breach walls previously considered impregnable. At Tyre, he ordered the construction of a half-mile causeway into the sea to reach an island fortress. The engineering alone defied logistical norms of the era. Ancient writers attributed his success to divine favor. Modern historians cite discipline, training, and inherited reforms from his father, Philip II. Yet certain details remain difficult to dismiss. Alexander consistently attacked at decisive points with uncanny timing. He anticipated enemy retreats before they began. He adjusted formations mid-battle with minimal delay, even when dust clouds reduced visibility to near zero. Reports from his officers suggest he rode within 20 feet of enemy lines at times, directing movements in real time. He survived wounds that would have killed most commanders. At the Malayan campaign in India, he was struck by an arrow that pierced his lung, yet returned to command within weeks. After Gaugamela, the Persian Empire effectively ceased to exist. Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis fell. By age 32, Alexander ruled territory larger than any Greek had imagined possible. And then, in 323 BCE, he died suddenly in Babylon. No definitive cause was recorded. His empire fractured almost immediately. If Alexander's victories were the result of extraordinary intellect alone, then he represents the peak of human strategic capability in the ancient world. But if something about his perception, his timing, his instinct exceeded ordinary explanation, then history may have witnessed not just a conqueror, but a phenomenon. What transforms a young king into a force that reshapes the known world before his 33rd year? And how many of those transformations came at a cost, history has never fully revealed. Hannibal Barca. In 218 BCE, a Carthaginian general made a decision that Roman commanders considered impossible. Instead of confronting Rome across familiar Mediterranean routes, he marched his army north toward the frozen spine of Europe. His name was Hannibal Barca. What followed would become one of the most audacious military maneuvers ever recorded. Hannibal departed from Iberia with tens of thousands of infantry, cavalry, and war elephants. The route ahead included hostile tribes, deep river crossings, and the towering barrier of the Alps. At elevations exceeding 8,000 feet, snow and ice swallowed entire columns. Supplies dwindled, men slipped into ravines. Elephants froze in the mountain winds. Roman strategists assumed no organized army could survive such terrain. especially in late autumn. Yet weeks later, battered but intact, Hannibal descended into northern Italy. The psychological impact was immediate. Rome had expected invasion by sea. Instead, an enemy army appeared from the mountains, accompanied by animals rarely seen on European battlefields. Panic spread through the Senate. Roman legions mobilized rapidly, confident in their numerical superiority and disciplined formations. Hannibal met them at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and ultimately at Cannae. Cannae in 216 BCE remains one of the most studied battles in military history. Rome assembled approximately 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, one of the largest forces it had ever fielded. Hannibal commanded perhaps 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. On paper, the Romans held overwhelming advantage. Hannibal deployed his center in a convex arc, composed of less experienced troops, with his elite African infantry positioned on the flanks. As the Roman legions advanced, they pushed into the curved line, gradually compressing Hannibal's center backward. It appeared as if the Carthaginian formation was collapsing. This was intentional. As the Romans surged forward, their dense formation lost lateral flexibility. At the critical moment, Hannibal's flanking infantry pivoted inward. Simultaneously, his cavalry, having driven off Roman horsemen, attacked from the rear. The Roman army found itself encircled on all sides. What followed was systematic annihilation. Ancient accounts suggest that up to 50,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day. The battlefield became a confined killing ground, with soldiers unable to swing swords due to crowding. Survivors described suffocating amid their own ranks. Cannae demonstrated not just tactical brilliance, but an understanding of spatial compression, momentum, and morale rarely seen in antiquity. For over a decade, Hannibal campaigned within Italy itself. Roman armies avoided direct confrontation, adopting a strategy of attrition under Fabius Maximus. Entire Roman generations grew up under the shadow of Hannibal's presence. Mothers reportedly silenced children with warnings that Hannibal was near. Yet, despite his repeated victories, Hannibal never received the reinforcements necessary to besiege Rome itself. Political divisions within Carthage weakened his long-term position. Eventually, Rome adapted, learned, and struck back in Iberia and North Africa. Hannibal would later die in exile, pursued by Roman pressure across foreign courts. His campaigns changed Roman military doctrine permanently. The concept of double envelopment became foundational in strategic education. Modern officers still analyze Cannae as a near-perfect example of battlefield encirclement. But beyond diagrams and casualty figures lies a deeper question. How did one commander repeatedly manipulate the largest military power of his era into catastrophic mistakes? Why did Rome, disciplined and vast, fall into the same psychological traps more than once? If Alexander demonstrated the power of speed and decisive thrust, Hannibal revealed something darker. He showed that the strongest army in the world could be made to destroy itself from within its own momentum. What kind of mind sees an enemy's strength not as a threat, but as a weapon waiting to be turned? Julius Caesar. In 49 BCE, a Roman general stood before a narrow river in northern Italy and made a choice that would end a republic. The river was called the Rubicon. Roman law forbade any general from bringing his army across it into Italy proper. To do so was to declare war on the Senate itself. The man who stepped forward that winter night was Gaius Julius Caesar. According to later accounts, he paused briefly before uttering words that would echo for centuries. The die is cast. What happened next should have destroyed him. Instead, it reshaped Rome forever. Years earlier, Caesar had embarked on the Gallic Wars, a campaign that would last nearly a decade. Gaul covered roughly 200,000 square miles, inhabited by tribal confederations skilled in guerrilla warfare and fortified settlements. Caesar commanded legions totaling perhaps 40,000 to 50,000 men at various points. By the end of the campaign, ancient sources claimed over 1 million Gauls had been killed or enslaved. While these figures are debated, the scale of destruction was undeniable. The Battle of Alesia in 52 BCE demonstrated the depth of Caesar's strategic vision. Facing the Gallic leader Vercingetorix, Caesar besieged a hilltop stronghold surrounded by steep terrain. When a massive Gallic relief army approached from outside, Caesar ordered the construction of 2 concentric fortification lines. one facing inward toward the besieged city and another facing outward toward the approaching reinforcements. The outer line stretched over 13 miles, reinforced with trenches, wooden stakes, and towers spaced every 80 feet. His forces, outnumbered on both fronts, held both siege and counter-siege simultaneously. The Romans repelled wave after wave of attack. At the critical moment, Caesar personally led cavalry reserves to seal a breach. Vercingetorix surrendered shortly after. But Caesar's genius extended beyond battlefield engineering. He understood narrative. Throughout the Gallic campaign, he authored detailed commentaries describing his victories with clinical precision. These reports circulated in Rome, shaping public perception. He portrayed himself as disciplined, restrained, and necessary. His enemies were framed as chaotic threats to Roman stability. By the time his term in Gaul ended, he had transformed himself from ambitious aristocrat into national hero. The Senate grew wary. Political rivals demanded he disband his army before returning. Caesar understood the consequences. Without his legions, he would face prosecution. With them, he would face civil war. Crossing the Rubicon was not a reckless act. It was calculated. His march toward Rome was swift. Many cities opened their gates without resistance. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and now his opponent, retreated east. Caesar pursued him across Greece. At Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar's smaller force defeated Pompey's larger army through disciplined reserve deployment and exploitation of cavalry weaknesses. The Republic never recovered. Within years, Caesar held dictatorial powers. Reforms reshaped calendars, debt systems, and provincial governance. Yet in 44 BCE, he was assassinated in the Senate by men who claimed to defend liberty. His death unleashed further chaos. Ultimately, the Republic fell, replaced by an empire under Augustus. Caesar did not merely win battles. He redefined the relationship between military power and political authority. He demonstrated that control of narrative, loyalty, and speed could outweigh tradition and law. If Alexander conquered territory and Hannibal dismantled armies, Caesar conquered institutions. At what point does a general cease to serve the state and begin to embody it? And when military brilliance merges with political ambition, can any republic survive the result? Genghis Khan. In 1206 CE, on the windswept steppes of Central Asia, a tribal council gathered to declare a new title. The man before them had survived betrayal, enslavement, starvation, and war between rival clans. He was no longer simply Temujin. He was proclaimed Genghis Khan, ruler of all Mongols. At that moment, few beyond the steppe could have imagined that this nomadic confederation would soon redraw the map of Eurasia. Within decades, cities that had stood for centuries would fall in weeks. The Mongol army was unlike any force Europe, Persia, or China had encountered. Each warrior was a mounted archer, capable of firing accurately while riding at full gallop. They carried composite bows with draw weights powerful enough to penetrate armor at distances exceeding 200 yards. Mobility was their defining advantage. A Mongol unit could travel up to 60 miles per day, sustained by multiple remounts per rider and strict logistical planning. Yet speed alone does not explain their dominance. Genghis Khan reorganized tribal loyalties into a decimal system. Units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 were structured without regard to bloodline. Loyalty shifted from clan to command. Merit determined promotion. Discipline was absolute. A soldier who abandoned formation could trigger execution for his entire unit. Intelligence networks preceded invasion. Merchants, defectors, and scouts mapped terrain and city defenses long before armies advanced. Psychological warfare amplified their impact. Stories of total destruction were deliberately spread ahead of Mongol movements. Entire populations surrendered without resistance after hearing of cities leveled and towers built from enemy skulls. Whether exaggerated or not, the fear worked. At the Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223, Mongol forces lured a coalition of Rus princes and Cuman allies into pursuit. After feigning retreat for days, the Mongols turned suddenly, encircling and annihilating the pursuing army. The princes were captured and executed beneath wooden platforms while Mongol leaders feasted above, a symbolic demonstration of dominance. Siege warfare evolved rapidly under Mongol command. Engineers from conquered regions were integrated into the army. Chinese catapults, Persian miners, and Arab siege specialists became part of a mobile war machine. At Zhongdu, the future Beijing, Mongol forces breached walls previously thought unassailable. In Central Asia, cities like Samarkand and Bukhara fell despite thick fortifications. By the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his empire stretched across nearly 9 million square miles, the largest contiguous land empire in history. Under his successors, it expanded even further. Some historians emphasize administrative reforms, trade routes, and religious tolerance within Mongol governance. Others focus on the staggering loss of life, with estimates reaching into the tens of millions. Both perspectives coexist within the same historical record. What remains striking is the systematic nature of Mongol campaigns. They coordinated multi-pronged invasions separated by thousands of miles. Communication relied on relay stations spaced every 25 miles, allowing orders to travel with unprecedented speed across vast territories. To contemporaries, the Mongols appeared unstoppable. Entire civilizations collapsed under pressure they could neither anticipate nor counter. If Hannibal mastered the battlefield and Caesar mastered the state, Genghis Khan mastered movement itself. He transformed open terrain into strategic advantage and converted fear into preemptive surrender. How does a society of nomadic riders develop operational coordination that rivals modern armies? And if such transformation was possible in the 13th century, what limits truly exist on the scale of military reinvention? Saladin. In 1187 CE, under a scorching Levantine sun, a coalition army of Crusader knights marched across dry terrain toward what they believed would be another conventional engagement. Water sources had already been compromised. Temperatures exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Dust clouds thickened the horizon. Watching from elevated ground was a commander who had spent years preparing for this precise moment. His name was Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West as Saladin. The confrontation unfolded near the Horns of Hattin, twin volcanic hills rising above the plains of Galilee. The Crusader forces, numbering perhaps 20,000, advanced in tight formation, expecting to reach the springs of Tiberias. Instead, they found themselves surrounded. Saladin's army did not rush the attack. Archers harassed the Crusaders from distance, forcing them to halt and regroup. Mounted units blocked escape routes. Fires were reportedly set to thicken the air with smoke. Dehydration and exhaustion began to weaken morale before swords ever met shields. By the time full engagement commenced, the Crusader formation had already fragmented. The decisive collapse came when the True Cross, a relic carried into battle for inspiration, was captured. The symbolic loss rippled through the ranks. By nightfall, thousands were dead or taken prisoner. King Guy of Jerusalem was among the captives. The road to Jerusalem lay open. Yet Saladin's strength did not rely solely on battlefield maneuver. For years, he had consolidated fractured Muslim territories across Egypt and Syria. Rival factions, once divided, were unified under a common objective. His administrative discipline ensured supply lines and reinforcements could be mobilized efficiently. Unlike earlier commanders, he avoided reckless offensives. He waited, observed, and applied pressure gradually. When Jerusalem surrendered later that year, many expected retribution for the massacre committed by Crusaders in 1099. Instead, Saladin negotiated terms. Civilians were allowed to ransom themselves. Churches were preserved. The city changed hands without widespread slaughter. Chroniclers from opposing sides acknowledged the restraint. Western narratives often cast Saladin as adversary, yet even European writers described him as disciplined and principled. His leadership contrasted sharply with internal disputes among Crusader states, where political rivalry frequently undermined cohesion. Saladin understood the power of legitimacy. Victories were framed not only as territorial gains, but as restoration of balance. His reputation traveled across continents, influencing diplomatic relations beyond immediate conflict zones. Militarily, his strategy at Hattin demonstrated calculated attrition. He manipulated terrain, water access, and tempo. Instead of seeking rapid annihilation, he weakened opponents systematically. Patience became weapon. Despite his successes, Saladin did not expand endlessly. His campaigns remained focused. Upon his death in 1193, he left behind modest personal wealth, having distributed resources widely during his rule. If Genghis Khan embodied relentless expansion, Saladin represented disciplined consolidation. He proved that reclaiming territory could rely as much on endurance and coordination as on overwhelming force. What defines greatness in war? Is it the scale of conquest or the ability to control when violence stops? And when a commander wins not just through destruction, but through calculated restraint, does that alter the very nature of victory? Subutai. In 1237 CE, as winter tightened its grip over Eastern Europe, a Mongol force appeared along the Volga River. Snow blanketed the plains. Temperatures dropped well below freezing. Russian principalities believed the season itself would shield them from invasion. Instead, fortified cities began falling one by one. The commander orchestrating this campaign was not Genghis Khan. It was his most formidable general, Subutai. Unlike many battlefield leaders, Subutai was not of noble lineage. Born the son of a blacksmith, he rose through merit within the Mongol system. His greatest weapon was not brute force, but coordination across vast distances. The invasion of Europe was not a single frontal assault. It was a synchronized operation spanning thousands of miles. While one Mongol column advanced through Poland, another pushed into Hungary. Communications were maintained through mounted couriers capable of covering over 100 miles in a day. Orders traveled across frozen terrain faster than European kingdoms could mobilize response. At the Battle of Mohi in 1241, Hungarian forces assembled near the Sajo River. Estimates suggest they fielded up to 60,000 troops. Subutai's army was smaller, but highly mobile. During the night, Mongol engineers constructed a temporary bridge several miles downstream, unseen by Hungarian scouts. At dawn, while one Mongol unit engaged the main Hungarian camp frontally, Subutai's flanking force crossed the hidden bridge and attacked from the rear. The Hungarian army found itself compressed between riverbanks and encircling cavalry. As panic spread, escape routes narrowed. The battle turned into systematic destruction. Chroniclers described rivers running red. Within days, organized resistance collapsed. What made Subutai's campaigns extraordinary was their mathematical precision. He frequently deployed feigned retreats, drawing enemy forces into overextension. Pursuing armies believed they had gained advantage, only to find themselves isolated from support. Mongol cavalry would then reverse direction and strike at speed exceeding 40 miles per hour. Subutai coordinated invasions across multiple theaters simultaneously. In 1223, he helped defeat the Rus at the Kalka River. In the 1240s, he devastated Eastern Europe. Each campaign displayed anticipation of enemy response patterns. He studied terrain, weather, and supply limitations. He exploited communication delays between rival kingdoms. European commanders were accustomed to seasonal warfare pauses. Subutai ignored such conventions. He attacked in winter, spring, and autumn, maintaining momentum when defenders expected reprieve. Despite commanding armies that reshaped continents, Subutai rarely sought personal glory. His role remained operational. His name appears in records primarily as architect rather than symbol. When news of the great Khan Ogedei's death reached the Mongol army in Europe, campaigns halted abruptly. Subutai withdrew eastward to participate in succession politics. Had that recall not occurred, many historians speculate Western Europe might have faced full-scale invasion. Subutai demonstrated that warfare could transcend individual battles. It could function as interconnected operations executed across thousands of square miles, coordinated through discipline and foresight. If Alexander mastered decisive strike and Genghis Khan mastered mobility, Subutai mastered orchestration. What happens when war is no longer about bravery or numbers, but about predictive calculation across entire regions? And how different would European history look if that calculation had continued unchecked? Tamerlane, Timur. In 1398 CE, the gates of Delhi faced an army that had already carved a path of devastation across Persia, Mesopotamia, and Central Asia. The commander at its head was Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane. By then, entire cities had fallen before his forces even arrived, surrendering not to superior numbers, but to reputation alone. Timur's rise began in the fractured aftermath of the Mongol Empire. Claiming descent from Genghis Khan's lineage through marriage alliances, he understood the power of legacy. But unlike the unified Mongol Confederation of the 13th century, Timur's campaigns were built around deliberate spectacle. His armies were disciplined, fast, and strategically coordinated. But what distinguished Timur was systematic psychological warfare. When a city resisted, the consequences were calculated and theatrical. Chroniclers describe pyramids built from the skulls of defeated defenders, towers stacked in geometric formations as warnings to the next city in line. Whether exaggerated or not, these accounts traveled ahead of his army. At the Battle of Ankara in 1402, Timur confronted the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I. The Ottomans fielded a formidable force with experienced janissaries and cavalry. Timur's troops, estimated at perhaps 140,000, included war elephants captured from earlier campaigns in India. He exploited internal divisions within Bayezid's ranks, persuading certain contingents to defect mid-battle. As the engagement intensified, Timur's flanking maneuvers encircled the Ottoman army. Bayezid was captured alive. The defeat plunged the Ottoman Empire into years of civil war, halting its westward expansion into Europe. Timur's campaign stretched from the Indus River to the Mediterranean. In Isfahan, after rebellion broke out following surrender, thousands were reportedly executed. In Baghdad and Damascus, artisans and scholars were relocated to Samarkand, transforming it into a cultural center while leaving conquered cities weakened. Unlike Genghis Khan's administrative integration, Timur's empire relied heavily on fear and rapid campaigns rather than long-term governance. His strategy was expansion through shock. Cities often capitulated at the mere rumor of his approach. Military historians note that Timur's formations combined Mongol mobility with siege expertise absorbed from Persian engineers. His cavalry units executed coordinated feigned retreats, while heavy infantry secured captured strongholds. He balanced mobility with overwhelming force when necessary. By the time of his death in 1405, Timur controlled territories spanning nearly 4 million square miles. Yet his empire fragmented rapidly afterward. Without his personal authority, cohesion dissolved. Timur demonstrated that fear itself could become operational doctrine. He cultivated a reputation so severe that resistance appeared irrational. If Subutai perfected coordination and Saladin mastered restraint, Timur mastered intimidation. Can terror function as a sustainable instrument of strategy? And when victory is secured not merely by defeating armies but by dismantling morale before battle begins, what remains of the concept of conventional warfare? Admiral Yi Sun-sin. In 1597, off the southwestern coast of the Korean peninsula, a naval force prepared to confront what appeared to be certain annihilation. 13 warships remained under the command of Admiral Yi Sun-sin. Across the strait, over 100 Japanese vessels advanced in tight formation. The tide surged violently through the narrow channel of Myeongyang, creating whirlpools and currents that could overturn smaller boats. Most commanders would have retreated. Yi chose to anchor directly within the chaos. His decision should have ended his career. Instead, it altered the trajectory of an invasion. Just months earlier, Yi had been imprisoned after political rivals accused him of insubordination. Stripped of command and tortured, he was later reinstated when his replacement suffered catastrophic defeat. The Japanese Navy, supported by seasoned samurai marines, dominated open water engagements. Korea's naval infrastructure had been devastated. Yi inherited a fleet reduced to fragments. At Myeongyang, the strait narrowed to less than 1,000 feet at certain points. Currents shifted direction every few hours, reaching speeds exceeding 10 miles per hour. Yi positioned his ships to exploit these reversals. When Japanese vessels entered the channel, they struggled against the tide. Korean ships, reinforced and stabilized, maintained formation. Yi's flagship engaged first, drawing the enemy inward. Japanese captains expected numerical advantage to overwhelm resistance. Instead, the cramped waters prevented coordinated assault. As tides reversed, Japanese ships collided, entangled, and drifted into crossfire. Korean cannons, mounted to maximize frontal discharge, shattered holes at close range. The famed turtle ships, though limited in number, reinforced intimidation with iron plating and spiked decks that prevented boarding. By the end of the engagement, dozens of Japanese ships had been destroyed or disabled. The remainder retreated. The victory halted momentum of Japanese supply lines. Without naval dominance, ground forces advancing north faced logistical collapse. Yi's broader campaigns reflected meticulous preparation. He maintained detailed logs of wind patterns, current speeds, and enemy ship construction. His diaries reveal attention to morale and discipline. Sailors trained relentlessly in coordinated maneuvering. Cannons were calibrated for specific engagement ranges. During the Battle of Hansen Island in 1592, Yi deployed the crane wing formation, curving his fleet to envelop Japanese ships and isolate them within artillery arcs. The pattern resembled Hannibal's encirclement at Cannae, translated onto water. Despite his success, Yi operated under constant political pressure. Court factions doubted his caution and criticized his refusal to pursue reckless assaults. He prioritized preservation of fleet strength over symbolic aggression. In 1598, during the Battle of Noryang, Yi was struck by a stray bullet. Mortally wounded, he reportedly instructed officers to conceal his death until victory was secured. His final words emphasized continuation of command rather than personal recognition. Yi never lost a naval battle across 23 recorded engagements. If Timur weaponized fear and Subutai weaponized coordination, Yi weaponized environment itself. He transformed tides, geography, and limited resources into strategic superiority. What allows a commander to perceive chaos as advantage rather than threat? And how many invasions have failed not because of inferior numbers, but because one individual understood the terrain better than an empire? Frederick the Great. In 1740, upon inheriting the throne of Prussia, Frederick II faced immediate invasion. Austria, France, and Russia questioned the legitimacy of his rule and saw opportunity in a relatively small German kingdom. Prussia possessed limited territory, a population of roughly 2.5 million, and resources dwarfed by its rivals. Yet within decades, it would emerge as a dominant military power in Europe. Frederick did not inherit overwhelming strength. He inherited structure. His father had built a disciplined standing army, emphasizing relentless drill and standardized equipment. Frederick expanded this foundation into a doctrine of speed and calculated aggression. He believed that hesitation invited encirclement. Preemption became principle. At the Battle of Leuthen in 1757, during the 7 Years' War, Frederick confronted an Austrian army nearly twice the size of his own. Estimates suggest the Austrians fielded over 60,000 men, while Frederick commanded around 36,000. The battlefield stretched across open terrain in Silesia, with Austrian lines positioned defensively. Frederick executed what became known as the oblique order. Rather than engaging the entire Austrian front, he concentrated his forces against one flank. His troops advanced under cover of terrain folds, concealed from full view. As they struck the weakened sector, the Austrian line bent and collapsed locally before reinforcements could reposition. The maneuver demanded precise timing. Infantry units had to wheel and align while maintaining cohesion under fire. Cavalry charges were synchronized to exploit breaches immediately. Within hours, the larger Austrian army was routed. Frederick repeated similar tactics at Rossbach, where a smaller Prussian force defeated combined French and Imperial armies. His rapid marches allowed repositioning before enemies anticipated engagement. Units covered distances exceeding 15 miles in a single day, maintaining formation integrity upon arrival. But Frederick's brilliance carried risk. His strategy often depended on narrowing margins. A miscalculation in timing or terrain could expose flanks catastrophically. At the Battle of Kunersdorf in 1759, overconfidence led to severe defeat against Russian and Austrian forces. Nearly half of his army was lost. He reportedly considered suicide afterward. Yet he persisted. Through resilience and strategic recalibration, Prussia survived repeated coalitions. Frederick institutionalized military efficiency. Officer training, logistical supply, and battlefield communication were standardized. Artillery placement became more mobile and responsive. His approach influenced later commanders, including Napoleon. Unlike earlier conquerors who expanded vast territories, Frederick transformed a mid-sized kingdom into a recognized great power through structural militarization. The army became identity. Discipline became culture. If Yi mastered environment and Caesar mastered narrative, Frederick mastered systemization. He demonstrated that sustained military excellence could emerge not solely from individual genius, but from institutional refinement. What happens when a state defines itself through perpetual readiness for war? And can disciplined structure compensate for demographic and geographic limitations against larger rivals? Napoleon Bonaparte. In December 1805, near the town of Austerlitz, in what is now the Czech Republic, a French army faced a coalition of Russian and Austrian forces that outnumbered it by tens of thousands. Morning fog hung low over frozen fields. Napoleon Bonaparte deliberately weakened his right flank, inviting attack. Allied commanders believed they had identified vulnerability. They advanced to exploit it. It was precisely the reaction Napoleon anticipated. As coalition troops descended from the Pratzen Heights to strike the exposed flank, they thinned their center. Napoleon ordered a concentrated assault directly into the weakened plateau. French divisions surged upward through mist, splitting the Allied army in two. By afternoon, coordinated counterattacks shattered isolated enemy columns. The Battle of Austerlitz ended in decisive French victory. It is still studied as a model of deception and timing. Napoleon's rise began during the chaos of the French Revolution. Unlike monarchs who inherited command, he ascended through merit and audacity. His early Italian campaign in 1796 revealed operational fluidity. French forces moved rapidly across northern Italy, defeating larger Austrian armies in detail before they could consolidate. He restructured corps organization so that independent units could maneuver separately yet converge swiftly. Each corps contained infantry, cavalry, and artillery components, allowing autonomous engagement. This modular design enabled rapid concentration of force at decisive points. At Ulm in 1805, Napoleon encircled an Austrian army of roughly 50,000 without major pitched battle. Through rapid marches covering more than 20 miles per day, French corps repositioned to block retreat routes. Within weeks, the Austrian force surrendered. His campaigns often emphasized speed over attrition. He sought decisive engagement that collapsed enemy morale rather than prolonged siege. Yet his confidence occasionally bordered on overextension. The 1812 invasion of Russia marked a turning point. Napoleon assembled a grande armée exceeding 500,000 men from across Europe. Supply lines stretched hundreds of miles. Russian forces retreated strategically, avoiding decisive confrontation while employing scorched earth tactics. By the time French troops reached Moscow, the city was largely abandoned and set ablaze. Winter descended. Temperatures dropped below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Horses perished. Artillery froze. Retreat transformed into catastrophe. Of the original force, a fraction returned. Napoleon's earlier brilliance in timing and deception could not compensate for geographic scale and logistical collapse. Coalition powers regrouped. By 1815, after brief return from exile, Napoleon faced final defeat at Waterloo. Yet his impact endured. Military academies across Europe adopted corps organization and operational maneuver principles. Nationalism intensified in reaction to his conquests. The modern concept of total mobilization took shape. Napoleon demonstrated how a single leader could harness revolutionary energy, administrative reform, and battlefield innovation simultaneously. He bridged the era between dynastic warfare and modern state conflict. If Alexander expanded frontiers, Hannibal exposed vulnerability. Caesar seized institutions, Genghis Khan reshaped continents, and Frederick built systems. Napoleon fused strategy with mass mobilization. But even the most adaptive mind could not overcome environment, distance, and accumulated opposition indefinitely. Does greatness in command lie in undefeated record or in transformative influence? And when a commander pushes innovation beyond sustainable limits, does history remember triumph more vividly than collapse? Erwin Rommel. In 1941, deep within the blistering expanse of North Africa, a German general began rewriting the logic of mechanized warfare. His name was Erwin Rommel. British intelligence intercepts from that year recorded something unusual. Field reports repeatedly described enemy maneuvers that appeared to defy fuel limitations, terrain constraints, and conventional command structure. Columns of tanks materialized where reconnaissance had detected nothing hours earlier. Supply lines were struck at precise points. Defensive lines dissolved before reinforcements could arrive. The pattern was too consistent to dismiss. It was not supposed to unfold that way. Rommel commanded the Africa Corps, a force operating in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Temperatures regularly exceeded 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Sandstorms could blind entire divisions within minutes. Vehicles broke down under abrasive desert winds. Fuel shortages were constant. Yet Rommel repeatedly launched rapid offensives across hundreds of miles of open terrain, often with fewer tanks and artillery pieces than his British opponents. Detailed battlefield analyses from Tobruk and Gazala reveal a method that bordered on improvisational genius. Rommel frequently advanced with spearhead units extending 30 to 50 miles ahead of supply convoys. He operated dangerously close to collapse, yet relied on speed to maintain psychological superiority. British commanders often hesitated, uncertain whether they were facing a small probing force or a full-scale assault. That hesitation allowed Rommel to penetrate defensive lines before they stabilized. Captured Allied documents show repeated miscalculations about German strength. Rommel deliberately manipulated radio traffic to exaggerate numbers. He shifted armor under cover of darkness, masking repositioning behind dust plumes that confused aerial reconnaissance. In several engagements, his forces encircled larger British formations by exploiting open desert corridors that conventional doctrine considered too risky. Field testimonies from both sides describe Rommel as frequently present near front lines, sometimes within artillery range. He observed terrain personally, adjusting orders based on immediate visual assessment rather than delayed reports. This proximity accelerated decision cycles beyond what centralized command structures could match. Yet behind the momentum lay fragility. Logistics were stretched thin. Fuel shipments were vulnerable to naval interception. Every deep thrust into Allied territory risked isolation. After returning to Europe, Rommel's reputation grew beyond military circles. He was portrayed as the embodiment of tactical audacity. However, internal German communications reveal mounting friction between Rommel's operational instincts and strategic limitations imposed by higher command. His desert campaigns reshaped armored warfare doctrine. Rapid maneuver, deception, and exploitation of open terrain became core elements in modern military study. But a question lingers. How did a commander operating under severe resource constraints repeatedly destabilize a global empire's forces across thousands of square miles of unforgiving desert? And if speed alone explains it, why did opponents consistently fail to anticipate his next move? Georgy Zhukov. In October 1941, as German forces advanced toward Moscow, Soviet defensive lines appeared fractured beyond repair. Temperatures began dropping below freezing. Entire divisions had been encircled. Intelligence intercepts suggested the capital might fall within weeks. Yet inside the Kremlin, one commander was quietly reorganizing the front with a scale and precision that defied the visible collapse. His name was Georgy Zhukov. What followed should not have been possible. At the height of Operation Barbarossa, the German Wehrmacht fielded the most experienced mechanized army in Europe. Blitzkrieg tactics had dismantled Poland and France in months. Soviet losses in the opening phase were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of troops were captured. Equipment was abandoned or destroyed. The front stretched over 1,800 miles. When Zhukov assumed command of Moscow's defense, he ordered rapid fortification lines built across frozen terrain. Trenches were dug through soil hardened like stone. Anti-tank obstacles were installed in concentric belts. Reserve units were repositioned from Siberia after intelligence confirmed Japan would not attack in the east. Trains moved divisions across thousands of miles under radio silence. In December 1941, as temperatures dropped below -20 degrees Fahrenheit, Soviet counteroffensives began. German supply lines, stretched thin and unprepared for extreme winter, faltered. Zhukov coordinated simultaneous thrusts along vulnerable sectors, forcing the Wehrmacht into its first major retreat of the war. His methods were not elegant in the classical sense. Casualties were immense. Entire formations were sacrificed to fix enemy positions. But scale became weapon. At Stalingrad in 1942, Zhukov helped orchestrate Operation Uranus. German Sixth Army, deep within urban combat, had extended flanks guarded by weaker Axis allies. Soviet forces launched coordinated attacks north and south of the city, penetrating those sectors and encircling over 250,000 German troops. The encirclement closed within days. The psychological reversal was profound. Later, at the Battle of Berlin in 1945, Zhukov commanded over 2 million Soviet soldiers. Artillery barrages involving thousands of guns illuminated the sky for miles. The offensive advanced through entrenched defenses toward the Reichstag. Urban combat consumed entire city blocks. Archival documents show meticulous coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery. Zhukov insisted on overwhelming concentration of force at decisive points. Where earlier commanders relied on maneuver finesse, he relied on calculated mass. After the war, many of his reports were classified. Political tensions within Soviet leadership led to reassignment and marginalization. Yet, declassified materials revealed the extent of operational planning that sustained the Red Army through the most destructive theater in modern history. Zhukov did not merely win battles. He directed war across a front that consumed tens of millions of lives. If Rommel mastered speed and deception within limited theaters, Zhukov mastered endurance and industrial-scale mobilization. What allows a commander to absorb catastrophic losses and still orchestrate reversal? And when victory depends not on elegance, but on the capacity to sustain unimaginable pressure, how should history measure greatness? Conclusion. These commanders reveal a disturbing pattern that extends beyond individual battles or national borders. They did not simply win wars, they altered the mechanics of war itself. Across centuries and continents, each one introduced a shift in perception, movement, organization, or psychological dominance that forced the world to adapt or collapse. This was not coincidence. Alexander demonstrated that speed and decisive strike could dismantle empires once thought permanent. Hannibal proved that superior numbers could become fatal liabilities. Caesar fused military command with political transformation, dissolving a republic from within. Genghis Khan and Subutai converted mobility and coordination into continental-scale dominance. Timur weaponized terror. Saladin weaponized restraint. Yi Sun-sin weaponized geography. Frederick weaponized discipline. Napoleon weaponized mass mobilization. Each breakthrough did more than secure territory. It reshaped doctrines that endured for generations. Yet a second pattern emerges beneath the victories. None of their systems remained stable without them. Alexander's empire fragmented immediately. Timur's domain splintered after his death. Napoleon's continental structure collapsed within years. Even Caesar's reforms triggered civil war before consolidation. Military genius, it seems, is both creative and destabilizing. When one individual sees patterns others cannot, entire societies reorganize around that perception. But once the mind at the center disappears, the structure often strains to hold. The question is not simply what makes a commander great. It is what happens to the world when one appears. Are such figures products of unique historical conditions, or do certain individuals possess cognitive frameworks that surface only in times of instability? And if future conflicts demand innovation at similar scale, will another mind emerge capable of rewriting the rules once again? History suggests that when it does, the cost will not be measured only in miles conquered or battles won, but in the irreversible transformation of the world that follows.